One of the small books that Prabhupada wrote was Beyond Birth and Death, which is actually recorded from some lectures on the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna asked some questions to Krishna at the end of the 7th chapter about death, how you die, etc., and go out of the body. So then Krishna begins to explain about this in 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So the subject of birth and death is very important. Everybody celebrates birth. We have birthdays for different people. And of course we have medical science that talks about birth and conception, etc. And we have death. Everybody also knows about death. And in spite of the fact that many people cannot explain it, everybody commemorates death somehow or other. So we have ceremonies for death all around the world. Some of the ceremonies are quite simple, some are a little bit more elaborate, but we all have some sort of rituals when somebody dies. And in India they have very elaborate rituals for death that go on for 13 days. Quite complicated ceremonies. And after that, every month they're supposed to observe a ceremony for the first year, and then every year they observe a ceremony, like a birth ceremony of a death ceremony that you celebrate every year. So it's emphasized quite a lot. We have in India what are called samskaras, ceremonies to commemorate different stages in life. So you have a birth ceremony, a conception ceremony first, to conceive a child. Then there's a samskara for birth, ceremony to mark the birth of the child. Or even before the birth we have several ceremonies. We have Govardhana, then we have Pumsavana, to make a male child, and Simantanayana, parting the woman's hair when she's 6 months in pregnancy or whatever. Then we have the birth ceremony, and after the birth then there's things like the name-giving ceremony, hair-cutting ceremony, and things like that. And then a very important one is education. When the child is 5 or 6 years old, if they're upper caste, Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, or Brahmanas, they get what is called Upanayanam samskar. They get the Brahma Gayatri mantra. And with that mantra, then they're qualified to begin studying the Vedas. So that's the beginning of their education. The next ceremony is graduation from the Gurukul. It's called Samavartana. And then the next ceremony is big one, marriage. Big marriage ceremony. This is also a very complicated ceremony. Of all the ceremonies, maybe the Upanayanam, when you start your education, is quite long. Then the marriage ceremony is the next long one that's probably even more elaborate, which may go on for many days. And even today in India it goes on for many days usually. So that's called a samskar also. Then of course, after they get married, then again they have children, and they go through the whole cycle of having samskars for the children again. So yeah, these are called samskars. But then there's another samskar. This is the death samskar, this funeral ceremony, Shraddha rites. Usually they don't keep it in the same book as the auspicious ceremonies. They put it in a separate book, and there's special priests for the death ceremony also. They don't mix the two persons up. The priest for the marriage is not the priest for the death ceremony. So death is quite a complex ceremony there for death in India. But all around the world they do have some commemoration of death. And of course even in atheistic countries they have ceremonies when people die. Famous leaders die or whatever, they may have a ceremony even if it's an atheistic country. So death is recognized in its grossest aspect, is recognized because the body gone, it doesn't function anymore. Person can no longer speak or do anything, basically. So that's the concept for some people. But of course people wonder what happens. Is that all there is? You die and that's it. So those 2 points are the marked for a person, birth and death. And in between that then we got life, the lifespan of an individual. So that also, even though it is visible to our eyes, it's quite mysterious. And no one can quite define what life is. In science, they've tried to define it in terms of chemicals and whatnot, but they've actually not come to a satisfactory conclusion about what life is. They know the contents of the body. For instance, if we're chemists, we can analyze it in terms of chemicals. If we're a biologist, we can analyze it in terms of DNA and RNA and factors like that, or cells and how the cells form, interact, etc. There are many ways in which we can analyze life in terms of the body. And you can do that. For instance, you can take all the chemicals in your body and say there's so much percent calcium, so much percent iron, so much phosphorus in your body, so much water, and maybe salt and other substances. And you can add it all up. It's not a very satisfying thing, because actually, what's it worth? Maybe a few dollars, 50 cents worth of chemicals. So if someone tells you you're only worth 50 cents, you're not going to be very impressed with that. You may get insulted. So we can't simply say you're a bunch of chemicals. It doesn't. Human life is more than chemicals. It's not just things like that. And so it's not a satisfying answer if we just analyze your body. So we can continue to ask, who are we? Which is a very essential question for the human being. It is not a question for the animals. Animals don't ask that question. They just eat, sleep, mate, and defend, and go off through their life. But human beings ask this question. This is the special privilege of the human being, to ask such questions about existence. Why do I exist? Or do I exist, first of all? And if I do, then what is the purpose of my existence? And this question, though we may, in the modern world, people say, well, that's very abstract and philosophical. For thousands of years, human beings have asked this question. They weren't so primitive after all. They've been asking this question since the beginning of time. And it comes up over and over again in the Vedic literature. Who are we? Why do we exist? Oh, something here. We could try evolution, as Darwin tried. His theory of evolution, he had, okay, what is our existence? It's mutation and gradual development of different creatures through survival of the fittest, and then finally we get a human being coming out of all this. How does this take place? It all takes place by chance. So then ultimately, what is a human being? No meaning at all, actually. Why do we exist? Chance. What's the purpose of it? It was just all chance, that's all. So in one sense, human life doesn't mean anything. That's the conclusion if we take Darwin's theory and just think of that's why we exist. Because chemicals got together and they eventually by chance made life forms and finally a human being. So, that's the evolution theory. Of course, even the theory, we can question that. We come to the human being, and then the human being is supposed to be advanced and more advanced and more advanced like this, and we're supposed to evolve. But as human beings, are we really evolving at all? Are we really superior to animals? What is the judge of our superiority or our progress that makes us better than animals? Because if we look at human civilization, we'll see the more we advance, the more we like to destroy each other. We develop more and more sophisticated weapons. If we examine the finance of a country or the budget, probably in most countries they'll spend about over 50% of the budget is for armed forces. Okay? Weapons and things like this, and training people up to fight. And the weapons get deadlier and deadlier all the time. So our civilization means progress in how to destroy each other. And this is peculiar because we don't see this feature in other species of life. They don't try to destroy their own species. They like to preserve their species somehow or other. So we find over and over in history, we find huge wars taking place. Like the 100 Years' War, the 7 Years' War, the 8 Years' War, the 40 Years' War in Europe. All sorts of wars took place. Of course, we have Battle of Kurukshetra in India. And in the modern world, then we had First World War, and we had Second World War. And each time they said, we're not going to have another war. And they made League of Nations after the First World War. Then they had the Second World War. Then they had United Nations. And then more wars started again. And we had Vietnam War and Korean War and so many other wars taking place now. So we cannot stop fighting each other and killing each other. So I think the estimate is maybe 40 million people died in the 2 world wars or something like that. Maybe more than that, twice that, or something like that. Not just due to weapons, but all the diseases and the starvation and all the things that happened as a result of the war. But it was all man-created, human-created destruction. And animals don't do that. And we don't have a world war of the dogs, a world war of the cats, and all the cats get together and start fighting each other. But human beings are so advanced and so intelligent that they do this, and they have wars with each other. So how advanced are we? And what is this whole progress from, a monkey and all this, and we get up to human being, and finally we get human? What's going to happen to us? What's our future as human beings in our so-called progress? Of course, science fiction says maybe we turn into robots in the future or something like this. So it's all very hypothetical and rather puzzling. But doesn't really answer our question, who are we? So if we go to physics, we have all sorts of theories based on more theories. And we can discuss what is the universe and how life arose in the universe and how big is the universe, etc. And we'll get unimaginable figures for this in terms of time and space and whatever. Like this is the apparently the diameter of our universe, and this huge number, which is kind of inconceivable. And within that, then we get galaxies like this, which are groups of stars or suns with planets going around and like that. And we get billions of these galaxies all over the place, with tons of stars and suns and whatever in them, with tons of planets in them. So, and then there must be life there, because we have life on our planet. There must be life everywhere else. But then, how does it start? Of course, they say Big Bang. Everything started with the Big Bang, and then after the Big Bang, then gradually we get the planets, and then what happens? Somehow or other, life starts some. And then, of course, we explain it again by theory of evolution. Okay, things evolve from amino acids. They get together and form cells, and cells form together into little animals or animals or plants, and then gradually they evolve over millions and millions of years, and they get more complex and develop nervous systems, and then finally we get a human being. So, what is the meaning of life? It goes back to chance again. Yeah? Oh, huge universe. There's all chance. So that's what science tells us. And we've got this little Earth there, and just one of many, many places where there can be life, and somehow chance produced it. Of course, Sariputta is also, in just by mathematical calculations, has calculated the number of molecules in the ocean, the primordial ocean, and the number of let's say amino acids or something that may form accidentally, and how they combine together, and then how those amino acids can combine and make a very simple one-celled little creature. It's not mathematically possible by the theory of chance in all the history of the Earth that you could even get the little simple little one-celled little thing with a wiggle tail on it that wiggles around in the water. You couldn't even get that, what to speak about a bug or a spider or something like that in all the history of the universe. This theory of chance and combinations of molecules and amino acids to form into more complex things. No answer to it. So anyway, somehow the life is there, and it's very puzzling to us. And even though science tries to answer this question in terms of physics or chemistry or biology or whatnot, we're always left with that question, what is the meaning of life? And science doesn't seem to give us a satisfactory answer. So then, in spite of all science and whatever, a significant number of people are still not atheists in the world. They still believe there is something else there. They can't really believe that science is telling the real truth. So somehow, we're left with these questions. Who are we? Why do we exist? Where do we come from? Where do we go? So Prabhupada, in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, there he says this, that all the creatures are asking these questions. The birds are asking questions, animals are asking questions, but usually they're asking one question: where's my food? A human being will ask this question. That's his special nature. But are we only to ask questions and not get answers? We should also get answers. If we're human beings and we can ask this question, why don't we get a good answer to it? But the most intelligent people don't give us the answer. Scientists are supposed to be the most intelligent people. They don't give an answer which is satisfying. Yeah? So we keep asking the question, what is the meaning of life? Well, so science doesn't answer properly, what are we going to do? So go to the scriptures. So Veda means knowledge, to know. That's the meaning of the Vedas. So this is where we can get real knowledge. Answer to the question, why do we exist? What is the goal in life? Yeah? Science does not solve the problem. They give answers, but it's not really satisfying. Yeah? So if we go to the scriptures, then we can get an answer to that. And that's the whole purpose of the Vedic knowledge, the Vedic scriptures. It's a perfect source of knowledge. So there are many scriptures belonging to the Vedic literature, but very, very complex, too much literature, so therefore we have a very simple solution in terms of Bhagavad Gita. This gives the very bare bones philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita to answer all of our questions. So very abruptly in the second chapter, when Arjuna says, I surrender to you, you're my teacher, you're my guru, please tell me, what am I supposed to do? Shall I fight the war? Shall I not fight the war? I'm real confused. So immediately, Krishna gives the answer, which answers everything about birth and death. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body, from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. So by making a statement like this, Krishna defeats all of the scientists who are trying to find the meaning of life in chemicals and in DNA and RNA and material substances. It's not there. That's not what life is. It's the soul, completely different from the body, and not subject to material, scientific sense perception. Something quite different. But eternal. It does not die. So yes, the body born, grows, matures, dwindles, and dies. And then we have a problem. Why do we die, etc.? Answer is, you're not the body at all. The body gets boyhood, youth, old age, death. But the soul is not born and does not die. It's a very simple proposition. But many religions can't even come to this conclusion. They cannot distinguish the body from the soul even. But this is the very basic law or principle of spiritual life in the Bhagavad Gita, first teaching of Krishna. The soul is different from the body. You are the soul, you are not the body. Soul is eternal, body dies. So you don't die actually, you're not the body. Very simple concept, but quite revolutionary for the scientist. So in other words, though scientists are very intelligent in analyzing matter and how it works or whatever, good, but that's not life. That is not who you are. And that is why scientific explanations about life in terms of chemicals and amino acids is not satisfying to anybody. Okay? Because we are not actually matter at all. We want a different type of answer. Okay? So that's the First point made in Bhagavad Gita. That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. So we have world wars and we start killing each other. And then more people get killed and they say, we won the war, we killed more of your people. But actually nobody gets killed. You cannot kill the soul at all. It's something completely different. So all these efforts we're making to win or lose or whatever, meaningless. Yeah? So that's the Vedic conclusion, a very important principle, the basis of spiritual life, stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, Vedas, etc. We may not believe that. So why should we believe Bhagavad Gita? Why should we believe Vedic literature? So that's the doubting mind. Also, we can say to some extent it is also not surprising. Human beings, they like to question things. Unfortunately, the soul is not subject to the same type of proofs that we can use for material science. Because the soul is invisible. You cannot see it with a material instrument. You cannot carry out experiments and demonstrate the soul's existence because it's non-perceptible by the material instruments like microscopes or whatever. However, we get indirect evidence from science itself, which is interesting because generally scientists are so atheistic, they will discard everything. But we do get some indirect evidence through science itself. So we have one, Dr. Ian Stevenson, he's a psychiatrist, was a psychiatrist, he died about, 15 years ago or something. American, PhD, psychiatrist. So he was an atheist, and he began studying the subject of memories of past lives. Why do people have memories of past lives? Is it fake? Is it true? Why? Why does this occur? Why do they get these, if it's fake or whatever, it's imaginary, why they get these things in their mind? Little children get these things in their mind that they remember something. How do they get these memories? Yeah. So he took it as a matter of research, an interesting research subject. Let's examine all these children and people that claim that they have recollection of previous lifetimes, and we'll see why they're getting these memories. Where do these memories come from? Are they memories? Are they false or whatever? So he ended up studying 2,600 cases of children who recollected previous lifetimes. Many in India, but other countries of the world also. And he tried to interview them. And because he was a scientist, he just wanted to do everything scientifically. So he recorded everything, how to interview, what questions to ask, etc. How to carry out the procedure for investigation. So it was all like very scientifically organized. So the investigative aspect was scientifically done. And after he went through all these cases, then his conclusion is, I think a rational person can believe in reincarnation on the basis of evidence. So in other words, you go from body to body. You're not the body, and you go from body to body. That was his conclusion as a scientist. He said, I was an atheist when I started this project. I was just curious why children have these memories. But after interviewing everybody, it looks like the children are not lying. They have memories of another lifetime. How we can explain that? Because they actually were that person, and now they're this person. So something goes from one body to the other with that memory. That was his conclusion. And he's a scientist. You know? Mm-hmm. He also said that he was a little bit disappointed because he did this as a scientific project, and he displayed all of his methodology, etc., and interviewing everyone. And then he stated his conclusions. But he said most of the scientists did not want to comment on this subject. They would not, put forward a statement. They were too afraid of their own position, so they didn't want to comment on his work. because he was saying actually there's a soul. But scientists were afraid to say that because other scientists would ridicule them. So nobody wanted to comment on his work at all. He said, this is very disappointing as scientists. They don't have the courage to, critically analyze, see if there's fault. If there's no fault, and then come to a correct conclusion. So he said, there may be two streams of evolution. Okay, we have the biological one where there's bodies evolving or whatever. And then there's the personal one, that's the soul getting experiences life after life, in which they may evolve or devolve depending on their activities and their experiences. But basically he said, there's a soul here that's different from the body. And this is a scientist speaking. That was his conclusion. So, of course, people can argue with his research and methodology, whatever, but at least he was very convinced of this after interviewing everyone and following as much as could a very scientific procedure for his interviews. Now the only problem, of course, is it's based on testimony, that's all. Children testimonies of previous memories, basically that's it. So in that sense we can say it's unscientific because we want to see things, but so I said you cannot see the Atma or trace it, how it goes from one body to the other. So all we do is we have experiences. So that's the thing. But nevertheless, it's some sort of interesting evidence. So, in other words, he came to the same conclusion as Bhagavad Gita. You go from body to body. And you can go from all sorts of bodies. Animal bodies, human bodies, or whatever. And you go from one body to the other. We can't trace out a beginning or an end. Same as Bhagavad Gita's statement. You go from one body to the other. So he did this. He made this conclusion independent, that he wasn't reading Bhagavad Gita or anything. He was just trying to explain how children have these memories. In the course of his studies, he came out with some other interesting phenomena, which proves this statement in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Beyond Birth and Death, chapter, where Krishna talks about how you go to your next body. What determines your next body? So Krishna says whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his present body, in his next life he will attain that state without fail. So if you think of something when you're dying, that will mold your next body. You will get a body according to what you think of. Your mind determines your next body. That's the concept presented here. So, in a sense, this is reflected in some of the discoveries that Dr. Ian Stevenson made in his research. Of course, we have the example of Bharat. He remembered a deer when he was dying, and he became a deer. The power of the mind formed a physical body. Which is remarkable. How are we going to prove that scientifically? You'll say impossible. But what happened was, in his research, when he was talking to these children, some of the children had defects, birth defects, or problems with their bodies when they were born. This particular boy, you see on his chest, he's got these marks. You can't see it so much, but he had a bunch of white marks on his chest. He was shot in the chest in his previous lifetime, he remembers, with a shotgun. So the shotgun has many bullets, and went in his chest, and they recovered the autopsy report, which you see here. The policeman drew a picture of his dead body with the bullet hole wounds, one big hole in the middle, and then these other holes here. That was his previous lifetime, when they traced out the village where he was living, in his house, and how he died, and they went to the police office and they got the autopsy report, etc. So then when he compared this to the present body of this new boy, when he was born in the next body, the same pattern of the bullet hole wounds was impressed upon this child's chest when he was born. These white marks were there all over his chest in the same, exactly the same pattern. But this is of course surprising, but it wasn't the only incident. Over and over, he got the same phenomena. This one is a child with no fingers, as if they're being cut off, and he was born like that, as if his fingers had been cut off in the womb. But what the child remembers in previous lifetime is, yes, he was And it cut off those fingers. And he bled to death. So next lifetime, no, no fingers at all. There's another one of a girl. She's born without one leg, just from the knee down. No leg for some reason, but there's no genetic reason, and I can't figure out why she has no leg, because it wasn't caused by some drug she took or mutation or anything. There's no evidence in her genes to say that. But she also remembers previous lifetime. She was run over by a train and it cut off her leg and she died. Same place, right here, cut off. So she's born without a leg because of that. This is the case of a boy from Turkey. He has no ear. Why? Previous lifetime, he was shot in the head and blew off his skull here, and his ear got blown off. This lifetime, no ear, and there's a big mark here on his head. Okay? So in other words, the experience of death with a lost limb carried over into the next body and produced that body with that defect in it that was in when they're dying. Just like Bart remembered a deer, he became a deer. So like that, their body when they were dying forced its way into the next body. So that was one of the discoveries he made. Very interesting. The American Medical Association stated, in regard to reincarnation, he has painstakingly and unemotionally collected a detailed series of cases from India, cases in which the evidence is difficult to explain on any other grounds. He has placed on record a large amount of data that cannot be ignored. So some people are saying, okay, interesting data. Very interesting. So maybe not. But so that's one area, Dr. Ian Stevenson. Another is the near-death experience. In probably the 1950s and 1960s, when they got expert at doing surgeries and things like that in the hospitals, people would recover. And then some of the patients started telling stories when they were supposedly dead. So this is, for some time the doctors just ignored it, but some doctors got a little bit curious. Why so many patients are saying, because their heart stops, their brain stops, everything stops. But then these patients are talking about what happened when they were not even alive. Their brain was dead, and they're reciting experiences. How can this be? So some doctors began to investigate, which we call near-death experience. This experience when your brain is dead, but you have so-called experiences. And they gathered a lot. They got a lot of information from different patients, and they interviewed them, etc. And these doctors, and they studied the matter, and they were very surprised because the people came from all sorts of backgrounds. Some are laborers, some are doctors, some are lawyers, some are artists, some are writers, some are reporters, male, female, different countries of the world, Europe, whatever, all over the place. But they had very similar experiences when they're so-called dead. One is that they can perceive themselves leaving their body. Somehow they can see, even though their eyes cannot operate because their brain isn't operating, but they can see quite accurately what is happening. They can see the ambulance coming, or they can see the doctors operating on them or trying to revive them when they're dead, whatever. They can remember conversations between this person and that person. So they separate from the body, and they have some senses. They can hear and they can see. Another thing is, if they have a prolonged experience, they start going through a tunnel with a light at the end. And when they get through the end of the tunnel, they enter into the world of light. And then they think, oh, I'm in heaven now. I'm dead, I'm in heaven, and I feel quite nice. So in that experience, they don't have any feeling of pain at all. They feel very peaceful. Whatever, they don't feel the body, or whatever's accident or burn or whatever they're in. You don't feel anything. Very, very peaceful experience. And they may see people like angels or God or Buddha or somebody. They'll see relatives sometimes speaking to them, and they get a life review. their whole life. They see all the experiences of their life, what they did, and they can say, oh, wow, I really wasted my life there. I didn't do anything nice, you know. So they get a whole review of their life. So these are the common experiences they get. Different people from different, you know, religions and different races and different occupations, etc. All very similar. So they were very astonished by this. And of course, after the experience, because these people recovered, they changed. They understood there's a different meaning to life. I'm not actually the body. This was their experience. And they began to change their lifestyle. So the doctors who did this research, like Dr. Kenneth Ring, he was one of the earlier researchers, then he came to the conclusion, after having a near-death experience, people believe the end of life does not exist. They believe in some sort of life after death. Death vanishes for them. There's only life. So the people that had these experiences understood, I'm not the body. And then the doctors who recorded all these experiences, they also began to believe that, yeah, it looks like we're not the body after all. So again, some studies by doctors. Now there was Dr. Raymond Moody. He wrote a book called Life After Life. From my near-death research and my personal experiences, death is, in my judgment, simply a transition to another kind of reality. So in other words, we don't die. Yeah? Since then, there's been many other studies also. These were two of the early doctors that did studies like this. So this is research by doctors, and they weren't particularly religious when they started, but the conclusion was that you're not the body, due to, again, experiences of people. First was experiences of children, recollecting previous lifetime. In this case, experiences of people who almost die and they start leaving their body. And then they have an experience, I'm not the body after all. So, in this way we get some indirect evidence of you're not the body, you're the soul, which is the first point in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's statement. So, it seems to correlate. In the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna makes an interesting statement. Whenever the soul accepts or leaves the body, he takes these senses with him in the subtle body, just as air takes fragrances from objects and goes elsewhere. So how can they see, how can they hear when they're supposed to be dead and their brain isn't operating, so which means their eye isn't operating, their ear isn't operating, because the nerves is not operating. How can they perceive things? So they have another ear, they have other senses. So that's explained here in Bhagavad Gita. In the subtle body, you have your senses. And when you die, those senses go with you out of the body, then go into the next body. Or if you have a near-death experience, then you take your subtle body and your subtle senses and you go out of the body, then you come back to the body. But you have those subtle senses, so you can perceive with those senses as well. These are not spiritual senses, these are also material, but on a higher level. So in other words, we have another body with us that goes with the Atma when it leaves the body. That's the Sukshma Sarira, or the subtle body. We usually say it's mind, intelligence, false ego. There's also pranas in there, and the subtle senses, etc. And all this constitutes that subtle body. And when you die, the soul goes out, and that subtle body goes with you. And then it goes into another body. So that subtle body actually is quite complex and quite sensitive and quite important for us. It carries a lot of information in it. It carries all your previous experiences from previous lifetimes. It's like a hard disk of a computer where you store all your information. But it goes on life after life after life, and it stores all the stuff in your subtle body. Then that goes into your next body, your next body, your next body, and it keeps accumulating more experiences of this lifetime. So it's got a lot of information in it. It has all your desires, all your fears, all your hatreds, all these things from previous lifetimes in it. It also stores your karma, and also even your physical features, which is why if you have a memory of something in this lifetime, like a hand cut off, then that can influence your next body. So it's a very powerful aspect of the human being, the subtle body. which we don't even regard as real at the moment, but it's there, and it has a great influence on us going from body to body. Now, for instance, your likes and dislikes, desires and hatreds, etc. So, if you have a bad experience, for instance, in one lifetime, for instance, you drown, so that's a terrifying experience, that's held in your subtle body. And when you die, that experience is going to stay in that subtle body with the Atma, and when you go into your next body, that experience is going to stay in that body, in your new body, and you may have fear of water in that lifetime again because of that past experience. So this can explain many of the fears that we may have in this lifetime because of previous bodies' experiences coming into this lifetime through the subtle body. Like that. Physical features. So we had the case of the boy with a shotgun wound here when he was dying. That was preserved in the subtle body. It affected the gross body. It also wounded the subtle body, and it also got affected. So when he got in the new body, that subtle body started impacting on the gross body of the baby and produced form on that body like that, bodily features. So features can be stored in your subtle body and influence your next body, overpowering genetics or whatever else is there. Here's a nice example. I think I gave this before. Jeffrey Keane is a firefighter in New York City. This is a picture taken from 1995 when he was visiting a place in America, a historical place. He got some strange feelings. It was actually a battlefield where they had a battle about 100 years previously in, I think, a civil war or something like that. He didn't think too much about it, but he felt real strange when he was there, whatever. Later on, he picked up a book on the history of, civil war or something like that. And he looked through that, and he saw the pictures of the armies and the generals. And then he looked at one picture, and it looked like himself. 1860, General Gordon. I look very much like that person. Very surprised. He got a little curious. Well, this general, he found out different information about the general. And then his life pattern was very similar. General Gordon got wounded at a certain time, and he had to go to the hospital. Jeffrey Keane, when he was also had to go to the hospital, he didn't get a wound, but a mysterious pain came out in his stomach at one time, and he had to go to the hospital for that, exactly in the same place as the General Gordon got wounded at a certain period of his life. So he was saying, it's very strange, So he investigated many things about the general, and he found the pattern of his life was actually quite similar in terms of events of his life, etc. And ultimately, of course, many things were, he found his friend in the firefighting department, Wayne Zaletta, was very similar to another general in the same army who was his friend previously, General Cadmus Wilcox, 1860. So the two generals were friends previously, and now were firefighters in the firefighting department of New York City. So the physical appearance is very, very similar. Personality traits were very similar. Writing style was similar. Karmic group was there. He came with his friend, and he also started getting past life memories of that previous life as a general. So how all that was transferred, it came through the subtle body and then imprinted itself on him. The other aspect of the subtle body is karma. If we do a selfish act or a violent act and cause pain to other creatures in one body, then the karma, the reaction on us, is held in that subtle body. When we go to our next body, it's there, it's waiting for us, and at a certain time the karma will strike and we'll get the reaction equal to the action we've done in our previous lifetime. So that's the karma aspect. You cause injury, you get injury. And it's held in your subtle body, and it forces itself into the events of your life until it happens. So all these are held in the subtle body. Okay, this is just the Manu Samhita explains mamsa, or meat. as mam, me, and sahi. The animal whose flesh I eat now will eat me in the future. So if you eat meat, then you're giving suffering to the animal. Animal will get a chance to kill you in the future. You get the karma for eating the cow. So this reflects that law of karma. The pain we cause will come back on us in a future life. That's held in the subtle body, and it comes out maybe not this lifetime, or next lifetime, next lifetime. It will definitely come out. So I've shown that there's several researchers scientists who've said, okay, I think there's a soul because we interview these people like this, or interview those people, and we find it looks like there must be a soul after all. So, of course, Bhagavad Gita simply states the fact: you're not the body, you're the soul. So what happens next when we understand we're not the body, we're the soul? So if we can become fixed in that realization, I'm not the body, I'm the soul, then we can get some peace. As Bhagavad Gita says in chapter 5, he whose happiness is within, whose enjoyment is within, whose sight is within, is a yogi and attains liberation in Brahman. So we're talking about what's within is the soul. If we understand we're the soul, we can get happiness, we get peace, we get liberation. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to do that. Even though we are the soul, our senses, our mind, intelligence, our false ego push us into ignorance, to forgetfulness. So we don't know we're the soul at all. Opposite. So it pushes us away from this peace and satisfaction into a different world. That's because of our senses. And that's illustrated in the Bhagavad Gita. We have this picture, which is actually from the Upanishads, which describe the soul as a passenger in a chariot drawn by horses, which are the wild senses, with the bridles and the driver. Here the driver is actually blind. This is the intelligence. And the bridles is the mind. And the horses are wild. And they're running around doing whatever they want. And they're carrying the chariot, which is the body with the soul in it, and pulling it everywhere. So the soul is clueless where it's going. And everything is done by the senses and the mind and intelligence. So this is the position of people in the material world. They don't know the soul or the goal of the soul at all. That's expressed in chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita also. For the person who meditates on sense objects, attachment arises. From attachment arises desire. From desire arises anger, if our desire is not satisfied. From anger arises bewilderment. From bewilderment comes loss of memory. We don't know what to do. From loss of memory comes loss of intelligence. From loss of intelligence, we are destroyed. So whatever we learn in terms of what to do and what not to do, we forget about it completely. We'll forget scripture, and we'll do some sinful act, violent act. Consequently, we destroy ourselves. We end up going downwards. Maybe we sink to an animal body or whatever. So that's the mind with the desires and the action. Under the veil of ignorance. We keep repeating these processes of action in the material world, and we don't even know there's a soul there. We keep acting like this. So this whole process goes on all the time. With the mind, desire, greed, anger, action, impressions going back into the mind, new desires developing, more greed, more anger, more action, more impressions. Life after life, this goes on. And it pushes us into another body in order to get our karma. So we end up in an endless cycle of birth and death, which we call samsara, like that. Wheel of samsara, with no beginning and no end. And you can be a human, you can be an animal, you can be a heavenly person on Devata, you can be a demon, you can go to hell, you can be a ghost, you can be a plant, you can be an animal. You can go through all these different species of life. So that's why we have this whole circle here. You can go in any of these species of life. Okay. So we're stuck in this law of karma under the ignorance, controlled by time, and it's almost hopeless to get out of that position of ignorance. But nevertheless, as a human being, we have that opportunity. We can ask the question, who am I? What is my goal in life? How can I get out of this position? And if we are intelligent, we go to scriptures and we say, I'm not the body, I'm the soul. And I'm going from life to life like this. The body is going from body to body, but can we end this process or not? So the answer is you can. You can get out of this whole process. So we do have choice in that regard. That's not under the rule of karma at all. That choice is in every human being. We can choose to get free from this wheel of karma. The first choice we can do is choose what type of activities we want. If we do tamasic actions in the mode of ignorance, we will end up as ghosts, animals, in the hellish worlds, as illustrated in the wheel of karma. If we do actions in rajas, mode of passion, we stay as a human being, or we enter as a demon world, asuras. If we do sattvic action in the mode of goodness, we can go to heavenly planets, Swargaloka, Devaloka, etc. So that's simply by choice. We can choose these different destinations. So to help us, we have the karma yoga method mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. This restricts our activities so that if we choose to follow this system, gradually we can rise upwards from tamagun, rajagun, sattvagun. We can change our destination into a heavenly destination instead of an animal destination through the system of varnas and ashramas, following all the rules. So that's a basic type of regulation of the human senses. Bhagavad Gita also presents another process called Jnana Yoga. This is for people who are more intelligent. They can accept, I'm not the body, I'm the soul. So now let me realize this, and let me stop the process of birth and death. So this is a process of philosophical analysis of your existence. And the Jnana yogis, they study Vedanta Sutra. And they practice austerities and renunciation and controlling their senses to get liberation. You can also try Ashtanga Yoga. You control the mind. We saw the mind was the source of desires and hatred, causing us to act and causing us to get karma, etc. So, control the mind. Stop the mind. Yoga means to stop the actions of the mind completely. So, you do this through asana, pranayama, and meditation, etc. Stop everything. The last process mentioned in Bhagavad Gita to solve this problem of birth and death is bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion to the Lord. So this is the ultimate solution to birth and death. How do we get beyond birth and death? Well, you can't get out of it through karma yoga. You can get better birth and death, that's all, by going to Swargaloka. If you do Jnana and yoga, you can get out, but it's rather difficult, as we see from the yogi here. So the easy process of getting beyond birth and death is through the process of bhakti yoga or devotional yoga. This process is a little different from this process, the Ashtanga yoga or Jnana yoga, which try to stop us from using our senses and controlling our mind completely. Instead, we engage our mind, we engage our senses, we engage hearing, etc. So it becomes an easier process for us. So here are the different processes stuck in the gunas. So we have tamagun with sakama karma yoga with a lot of material desires, rajaguna and rajaguna. Then we get to nishkama karma yoga without the desires, and gradually we rise up to sattva, in which we get jnana and ashtanga yoga. But bhakti yoga is beyond the gunas of the material world completely. That makes it very special. And though it's the highest process, it's also the easiest process. And it's also the ultimate process. So, the senses and the mind, intelligence, ego are pushing us into ignorance. And then we have karma yoga to start regulating us, etc. So the other is to use the senses, mind, intelligence, and direct it towards Krishna. And so in doing so, we also engage the soul, the Atma, in serving Krishna. So this is the process of bhakti yoga. We don't renounce the use of the senses, we engage them in serving Krishna with devotion. Yeah? So in this way we spiritualize our body. So as I said, we utilize our senses. Hearing, ear, hearing about Krishna. Seeing Krishna, the deity form. Glorifying Krishna, using your voice and your tongue. Using your nose to smell the incense and flowers offered to the Lord. Using your tongue to taste prasadam offered to the Lord. Using your whole body to dance for the Lord. Many other activities also. Use your mind to meditate on the Lord. Okay? So we have all these different ways we can engage the senses. And of course the easiest one is, we call the Yuga Dharma, the process for our particular age, Kali Yuga. In this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the only means of deliverance is chanting the holy name of the Lord. There's no other way, no other way, no other way. So this is Nam Sankirtan process. Of all the different ways we can get out of birth and death, this is finally the ultimate process. So at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, after Krishna, of course, if he starts out with saying you're not the body, you're the soul, then he gives these different yogas, karma yoga, gyan yoga, astanga yoga, and finally bhakti yoga. At the end of the Bhagavad Gita, he summarizes everything by saying just do bhakti yoga, nothing else. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. This is Krishna's conclusion. If we can simply accept that statement, we've learned the Bhagavad Gita. At the end, there's this promise, where there is Krishna, the master of yoga, where there is Arjuna, the holder of the bow, there will be eternal prosperity, victory, ever-increasing wealth, and righteousness. So not only do we get Krishna, but we get everything else that we could desire. We get eternal prosperity, victory, increasing wealth, and righteousness. So in this way, the process of bhakti yoga fulfills all of our desires and takes us beyond birth and death. Okay. Question?
Is that the last statement there?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the Bhagavad Gita's?
Yeah. You'll find out at the end of the Bhagavad Gita.
I thought it said that when he's Arjuna, the great archer, there will be victory and morality.
Morality.
Yeah.
Righteousness. Yeah, that's the last one.
Righteousness.
Yeah.
I could have sworn, I read it a number of times, I thought it said there is Krishna, the master of the yoga, where there is Arjuna, the great archer, there will be prosperity, victory, and morality.
Yeah. Well, that's righteousness, niti.
One of the screens there mentioned that the soul is pervading the whole body. So that's what we understand as consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Seeking the presence of the soul. So with the mind intelligence as well, would we say that that's pervading the whole body, or is that more localized?
In a sense, we can say yes, the mind is, but they only act because of the Atma, because they are connected with the consciousness. And the mind, what do? We feel, we hear, we perceive, or we remember. So actually, it's connected with consciousness, and the consciousness is coming from the Atma. So they can pervade because of the consciousness of the Atma.
So a lot of interaction.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Seems like sometimes we have two lives, like when we're born, it seems like before we go to school, when we first go to school, we're all young and innocent, we do what we're told, and in general, that we sort of follow the rules, we're truthful and things like that. Then somewhere along the line there's a change, maybe when we get into like our early teens or something like that, there just seems to be a change of consciousness, and even if we sort of associate with certain people in our young days, then after we sort of make that change, we can't even relate to these people like what we did before, and possibly it changes again later on when we're sort of like in our 20s or something like that. So there seems to be like this tremendous changes that we go through in our psyche. So would that be sort of like a reflection of what we did in our last life, or something to do with our subtle body? Or
Possibly also probably could be, it's something to do with our physical body as well. Just like we have animals and they raise their children, and at a certain time the children have to become a little independent and they send them off out of the nest, kick them out of the nest or whatever like this. Or the animals, you know, the small animals, they have to be, you know, independent after some time like that. So we can say maybe it's a gross physical aspect of the human being that as they grow up, then the children try to become a little bit independent. Of course, we know that this gets a little restricted in the Vedic system, where they have the family unit. So you're kind of stuck in the family, you don't go out of that family. So that kind of reins in that type of instinct that may be there, that we say primitive instinct of the animal. So they kind of keep everybody within the family, and the family bond is stronger than the instinctual bond. But in the modern world, the family unit is very weak, and therefore this instinctual thing is maybe more free, so therefore everyone wants to get free of the family and they run away off, or separate from the family and start becoming independent. But I think probably the Vedic system understood it's not so good that people go like that, you know, separate. So that's why they kind of have all these rules of etiquette by which they keep the family together. And they, you know, they have to act within the family and have loyalty to the family, etc.
Hare Krishna. So it seems like a common feature of what carries over from one body to the next is like intense trauma or serious attachment. So you see when those people, they have the birthmarks from their previous life, they have this extreme trauma, they didn't have a chance to let go of that, so to speak.
Yeah,
all of a sudden
it's stuck onto them.
And remanifested it. So I suppose the bhakti process is doing the opposite of that. It's where the opposite of trauma is love, so to speak, and then we're attaching these senses to transcendental things. So rather than being reborn in the material world, where that's like having the opposite effect, the bhakti process.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned in relation to the nectar of devotion, the first characteristic of bhakti was klesha agni, to destroy klesha, and then klesha was composed of ignorance, which is at the very top, and then we get desires, and then we get sinful activity and karma, which creates the suffering for us. So in there we get all these different things like impressions in the mind, memory, and all this stuff stored in the subtle body, which goes from one body to the other and causes us to do activities, etc. So that's the material aspect under ignorance. So ultimately caused because of our self-centered desire to enjoy in the material world. So the process of bhakti is to do the opposite, to take us away from that desire to enjoy and instead give the enjoyment to Krishna out of great love. So instead of selfishness, we're trying to express unconditional love. So then naturally, all these things that are a result of our selfish attitude, such as the desires and the traumas and the karmas and whatever, it all starts getting destroyed. The root of our position in the material world resulting in the ignorance that we're ignoring God and trying to enjoy it for ourselves gets destroyed. So therefore, all these other things that come out of that ignorance get destroyed along with it. All those impressions and whatever we've gathered up through many, many births of experience, they all get destroyed. So in other words, love is stronger than hate and all this. So we express the strongest love, and then that's love for Krishna, and then automatically all the other things dissipate. They disappear.
And a few other questions. So when people, like in the hospital room, so you're saying how they leave their body and they have their senses are still active and they can still interpret what's going on.
Yeah.
We say that's the subtle body.
Yeah. Well, because they're actually brain dead.
Yeah.
The brain isn't operating, so the brain's not operating, the eye cannot operate, so, but something is seeing and something is hearing. So what is it? It's just like if you have a hellish experience, you go to hell, then you have experiences, but you don't have a body. What is it? Well, your subtle body.
And I've heard a theory of reincarnation, because we normally think that, okay, say if I'm in my body now, I'm going to get reborn in another body in the future, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard theories that you can actually get reborn in the past.
Go backwards in time?
Yeah, I suppose past, present, and future is just kind of cyclic, right? So then, depending, it's just something I've heard. It's a story that I've the egg, that kind of.
Yeah. But generally, if you experience something in the physical body, then that karma is finished. And you get other karmas that were waiting for you. So you burn up the karma by experiencing it in a certain body. So if it's, then it would be a past karma, then it wouldn't be there anymore. You get burned up. But the thing is, we have karmas waiting for us from previous lifetimes that are not experienced yet and will not be experienced in this body. So they're waiting for future bodies, but it's from the past. So we get a lot of past karma with us right now. Plus we're accruing more karma. And that's not experienced in this lifetime at all. So that's going into the next lifetime and next lifetime. So we're getting past karmas coming up in, next lifetime, next lifetime, next lifetime.
And we can obviously be reborn in other universes as well. Is the jiva contained within this universe for now?
It's not said what one way there, but I would assume usually you can stay within the same universe and get your body this way. Yeah. If you get spiritual, then you can go to another universe and join Krishna. But if you're just stuck in karma, then you have enough opportunities within this world and this universe to get those bodies.
That's the matter. But we are going up and down the systems, aren't we?
You can go up and down.
Yeah, you can go.
Yeah, you can go to Svargaloka and drop down into human, and then drop down to an animal, then come back up to human, then drop down to a tree, and come up again to a human, then go up a little bit, then come down a little bit. So that's what Lord Jesus said, we're wandering in the material world, we're just going up and down all over the place, and we don't quite know where we're going. It's just no plan behind it, because we don't know the law of karma. When we figure out what the law is, then we can control we can, go upwards continually, whatever, through karma yoga, which is more or less okay, but then you can even make a mistake there. The real way is to stop the whole process. Yeah. So that we do that through bhakti. Okay? Hare Krishna.